The emergency room at 3 in the morning has its own heartbeat. I watched Sarah Martinez, our newest patient, tracing patterns in empty air with shaking fingers. Her eyes bounced around the room like a pinball, following phantoms I couldn't see. The usual late-night soundtrack played on, monitor beeps mixing with the distant squeak of nurses' shoes on worn linoleum. Most nights at this hour, we'd be dealing with the standard fare, drunk sleeping it off, maybe a sprained ankle. But when this 14-year-old stumbled through our sliding doors, barely staying upright even with her mother's help, I knew we had something else entirely. She moved like someone testing thin ice, uncertain if each step would send her plunging through. "Dr. West," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the hospital's mechanical hum. "The walls are breathing, the clock, its hands are melting like chocolate." I leaned in closer, noting her blown pupils. A chill crept down my spine, not from fear, but recognition. In 15 years of emergency medicine, I'd seen this exact constellation of symptoms only twice before. The way reality warped and writhed, ordinary objects morphing into nightmare versions of themselves, time itself becoming fluid, it all fit the pattern with disturbing precision. They teach us in med school, common things are common. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. But sometimes those zebras come charging straight through your ER doors. Sarah's mother sat frozen in her plastic chair, strangling her purse strap. "It started at dinner," she managed, voice cracking. She started screaming that my face was melting, like candle wax. We thought she was having a seizure. I watched Sarah closely as she jerked away from invisible threats. When I raised my pen for a simple test, she recoiled. "It's growing," she gasped. "Everything keeps changing size." The neurological workup came back clean, no signs of stroke or seizure, blood pressure normal, tox screen negative. Yet here she sat, watching her world dissolve and reshape itself before her eyes. I pulled up her chart, searching for clues in her history. No previous psychiatric episodes, no trauma. But buried in her recent medical records was a note about recurring migraines and a positive Epstein-Barr test from 3 months ago. That Epstein-Barr finding kept gnawing at me. Recent studies had been linking viral infections to neurological symptoms, especially in teenagers. Sarah's case might help us understand how a common virus could trigger such unusual symptoms, but I needed to be methodical about this. "Sarah," I said softly, "when things change size, do they get smaller or bigger?" "Both," she answered, staring at my ID badge. "Your name tag just stretched like a rubber band, then shrunk down to a tiny dot. Please make it stop." The fear in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't some bid for attention or made-up story. I'd seen enough of those to know better. To Sarah, these distortions were as real as the chair beneath her, even if nobody else could see them. The brain, when its wiring goes haywire, can create experiences stranger than any drug. Her description reminded me of an old medical text about a syndrome named after a famous story. Watching her struggle with her distorted reality, I couldn't help thinking of another young girl who fell into a world where nothing was quite right. I pulled her mother aside and spoke quietly. "I don't think this is psychosis. What I'm seeing points to something more specific, a condition called Alice in Wonderland syndrome." "Like the book?" her mother whispered back, bewildered. I nodded, explaining how Lewis Carroll likely wrote from experience, describing his own migraine-induced symptoms. It was one of those rare moments where medicine and literature perfectly aligned, giving us a name for this warped perception of reality. Before I could finish, Sarah cried out, "Doctor, the ceiling's coming down!" She threw her arms up to shield herself from the imaginary collapse. Her terror was genuine, even if the threat wasn't. The nurses looked over, concerned and curious. One moved toward the crash cart, but I signaled her to stay put. This wasn't your typical emergency. No one was coding, no alarms blaring about crashing vitals. What we had was far more unsettling. Sarah's mind was spinning its own version of reality, one that only she could see. I was reaching for my phone to call neurology when my eyes caught something in her chart that made my stomach drop. There it was, in black and white, family history of autoimmune disorders. In that moment, everything shifted. We weren't just dealing with hallucinations anymore. We were in a race to stop her immune system from attacking her own brain. The human brain reminds me of a city's navigation system, brilliant when functioning properly, but capable of leading us terribly astray when things go wrong. For Sarah, those neural pathways had become treacherous, turning her reality into something out of a carnival mirror maze. I stood at the nurse's station, studying her brain scans on the monitor, my attention fixed on the temporoparietal junction, that crucial crossroads where our brain makes sense of space, time, and our physical presence in the world. When working properly, the temporal and parietal lobes create a seamless symphony of perception. But Sarah's brain was playing a very different tune. Her symptoms pointed to macropsia and micropsia, a bewildering condition where objects appear absurdly large or frustratingly tiny. These weren't mere optical illusions. Her brain was genuinely struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. The scans confirmed my suspicions. The electrical activity in her visual centers looked like captured lightning, chaotic and unpredictable. This went beyond a typical migraine. The patterns matched classic cases of Alice in Wonderland syndrome, named, ironically, after Lewis Carroll's famous work. I couldn't help but think about Carroll himself, who suffered from the same condition that inspired his fantastical tales. Sarah's brain was experiencing cortical spreading depression. Imagine a slow, moving wave of disruption washing across her neural landscape, distorting everything it touched. While this mechanism typically triggers migraines, in Sarah's case, it was completely rewriting how she perceived reality. The hallway keeps stretching. Sarah called out from her room. I found her hunched over a piece of paper, sketching with trembling hands. Her drawing showed the hospital corridor warped beyond recognition, stretching endlessly like something from a dream. Next to it, she'd drawn her hand, appearing impossibly tiny against the bed rail. Looking at her artwork, I thought again of Carroll, whose migraines had inspired Alice's famous transformations. Sometimes reality truly is stranger than fiction. Unlike Carroll's fictional tale, Sarah faced a very real neurological crisis, one triggered by a viral invasion. Her history with Epstein wasn't mere coincidence. New studies had revealed how this common virus could prompt the immune system to turn against itself, essentially causing the brain to self-destruct. The virus had created the perfect storm in Sarah's nervous system, making her body attack its own neural tissue. This explained why Alice in Wonderland syndrome often emerged after viral infections, especially in young people whose immune systems were still learning to recognize friend from foe. Looking at another brain scan, I studied the inflammation markers. Though subtle, the signs were clear. Her immune system was waging war against her own brain cells, warping her sense of reality instead of protecting it. "Nothing feels right," Sarah said softly during my next check-in. "The ground seems so far below me, but my hands are enormous, like I'm trapped in some bizarre dream I can't escape." Her words perfectly described dysmetropsia, the distorted perception of size that defines AI duos. But her struggle went beyond visual distortions. She felt detached from her own body, experiencing what we call depersonalization. Simple actions like grabbing a cup or walking down a hallway became complex challenges in spatial awareness. The constant mental adjustments left her physically and emotionally drained. The parallel to Carroll's Alice wasn't lost on me, a teenage girl living through experiences that inspired a fantasy classic. But Sarah's reality held no wonder or whimsy. Each distortion, each hallucination, pointed to serious neurological dysfunction. While AIWS has been studied for decades, every case offers new understanding of how our brains construct reality. Sarah's experience was teaching us about the complex interplay between viral infections, immune responses, and perception. Her scans would later help other doctors identify and treat similar cases. As I watched her trembling hands reach for the water cup, her eyes widening with confusion as her mind played tricks on her, making the cup seem to grow and shrink before her, I finally understood why Carroll created his bizarre wonderland. Sometimes, when reality becomes impossible to explain, we need to build our own world where madness makes perfect sense, even if that world must be filled with philosophical caterpillars and cats that fade into thin air. The hospital corridors stretched endlessly that night as I grappled with what to do next. Sarah's condition was getting worse, and I had to choose: risk a lumbar puncture or hold out for the MRI. Above me, fluorescent lights droned on, each buzz as echoing the precious minutes slipping away. Every doctor knows the hardest decisions come in the dark hours. I found myself pacing, running through Sarah's symptoms for the 100th time. The telltale signs were there: objects appearing too small, then too large, time flowing like molasses. But something wasn't right. This was more aggressive than I'd ever seen. The brain scans showed subtle irregularities that didn't match typical migraine-induced Alice in Wonderland syndrome. "It's just migraines," Dr. Chen had said during our midnight meeting, his voice tinged with impatience. "We're not subjecting a teenage girl to an invasive procedure over some storybook syndrome." His words stung, but I understood. Most doctors saw AI duress as more curiosity than crisis. In my office, I fed Sarah's symptoms into our new AI diagnostic system. As it churned through countless case studies, a result caught my eye: autoimmune encephalitis, 12% probability. Not huge, but enough to make my stomach knot. It reminded me of a conference presentation last year where most doctors scoffed at a case linking AIWS to autoimmune disease. Now that dismissed case felt eerily relevant. Sarah's medical history revealed another piece: a brutal bout of mono 3 months ago. The timing nagged at me. The ceiling's eating the room, Sarah whispered during my check-in, terror raw in her voice. Her distortions were getting worse by the hour. She described the walls throbbing in sync with her heartbeat, and I remembered my old mentor's words: "The brain hides its secrets in plain sight." Dr. Harrison had taught me to trust patterns, to look deeper. Sarah's case was trying to tell us something. I just had to listen harder. I turned to my old files, searching for answers. 2 years back, I treated a patient with viral encephalitis who showed similar distortions in perception. The distinction was subtle but telling. It was all in how the symptoms developed. Viral cases typically hit hard and fast, but Sarah's situation, it crept up slowly, then picked up speed in a way that made my stomach turn. The nurses on nights kept reporting worse episodes. One minute she'd say her bedside table looked miles away, the next it was rushing at her face. Her bed would feel weightless, then she'd grip the rails, convinced she was sinking through the floor. These weren't random, there was a pattern here, pointing to something deeper in her brain. I glanced at her vitals: slight fever, BP jumping around. Small things, maybe, but they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. That AI suggestion about autoimmune encephalitis kept eating at me. Were we sitting here watching her immune system wage war on her brain while we waited for more proof? Her initial lab work was spread across my desk. Normal, most would say. But those tiny flags, the elevated inflammation markers, that slight oddity in her spinal fluid, they whispered something different. Put them together with everything else, and the picture started changing. "Dr. West?" I looked up to see Marie, one of our night nurses, in the doorway. Her mom's asking if we've made any progress. The weight of it all hit me then. Every minute we debated meant more time for damage. I stood watching Sarah sleep, her hands twitching as she fought battles in her mind I couldn't see. Going against the grain in medicine isn't easy, but sometimes your gut screams louder than textbooks. My phone buzzed, immunology sending over their latest paper. They'd found links between Epstein, Barr, the virus behind Sarah's mono, and autoimmune responses. The pieces were there all along, just waiting for someone to connect them. Then the AI alerts unusual activity in her right parietal lobe. The puzzle was coming together, one piece at a time. It nagged at her consciousness like an unfinished thought, not concrete proof, but another subtle warning that something in her mind had come undone. The lab hummed with activity at 4 a.m. as I watched Sarah's blood samples spin in the centrifuge. Each rotation felt like a lifetime, promising either clarity or more confusion. When the autoantibody results first came back positive, then negative on retesting, my heart sank. False positives weren't just lab errors, they could send us down completely wrong diagnostic paths. I found myself fixated on the CSF analysis, watching crystal, clear fluid drip steadily into collection tubes. Sarah had been incredibly brave during the lumbar puncture, squeezing her mother's hand white, knuckled but never flinching as the needle went in. Though the procedure went smoothly, these results had to count for something. The Epstein-Barr titers caught my attention as I leaned against the cold lab counter. Something clicked. This wasn't just a lingering virus. It had triggered an immune response that was now attacking her brain. The timeline matched perfectly with her recent viral infection. though most would have written it off as post-viral fatigue. But those peculiar perceptual distortions told a different story. She used to read Alice in Wonderland every night. Sarah's mother had told me earlier, her voice breaking. Now she says the words crawl off the pages like ants. She can't even look at the book anymore. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Her beloved story had transformed into her personal hell. Scrolling through case studies on my tablet, comparing infection patterns and symptom onset, I couldn't ignore the correlation. Yet doubt gnawed at me. Was I seeing connections that weren't there? The responsibility of diagnosing a teenager weighed heavily. One wrong call could derail her life. I pulled her intake forms one more time, scanning the family history. There it was, her aunt's recent multiple sclerosis diagnosis. Another autoimmune condition. In medicine, these patterns speak volumes. Autoimmune diseases have a way of running in families, though they rarely show up the same way across generations. I hadn't thought much of this detail before, but now it felt crucial. When the lab tech waved me over to check something odd in the CSF analysis, I felt that familiar flutter of discovery in my chest. The protein levels were off, not dramatically, but enough to catch attention. Not the typical pattern we'd expect with a viral infection either. It was the kind of subtle finding that most would brush past, but something about it wouldn't let me go. I pulled up the AI diagnostic system again and fed in the new lab values. As the screen processed the data, something jumped out in her EEG readings that made me lean forward. The right parietal lobe was lighting up during her episodes, a pattern we'd somehow missed before. But the AI spotted something else too. Her temporal lobe activity shifted strangely whenever she reported those bizarre time distortions. The moments she described, where minutes stretched endlessly or seconds vanished in a blink, her brain activity told that same story. It was like watching her internal clock being randomly rewired by her own immune system. This wasn't the simple AIDS case triggered by a virus that we'd assumed. With the AI's help, we'd stumbled onto something more intricate. The Epstein-Barr virus seemed to have set off an autoimmune response, causing her brain to turn against itself, specifically targeting regions that handle how we process space and time. Running the EEG data through multiple analyses only confirmed our suspicions. The unusual activity followed clear patterns during her perceptual episodes, like electrical storms sweeping across specific brain regions. I called Dr. Chen, our neuroimaging specialist, at home. She came in early to review the scans. "See here, in the hippocampal region," she said, pointing to subtle changes I might have missed. She pulled up comparison scans. "These inflammatory markers are easy to overlook, but they're definitely present. This isn't just warping her sense of space, it's disrupting how her brain processes and stores sensory information at a fundamental level." I knew we needed to act quickly. I called the team together for an emergency consultation. The pieces were falling into place, her symptoms, lab work, EEG readings, and the AI diagnostic data all suggested her immune system had turned against her brain. We'd found our answer, but that was only half the battle. Now came the gut-wrenching decisions about treatment. None of our options were gentle ones. They couldn't be, given what we were up against. We'd have to aggressively suppress Sarah's immune system to stop it from destroying more brain tissue. The treatments carried serious risks, but doing nothing would be far worse. Her brain was under attack, and permanent damage was a real possibility if we didn't act fast. Time was working against us. I was still poring over the final lab report when sunrise painted the hospital windows. The harsh daylight seemed to sharpen every detail as I triple-checked our findings, desperate not to overlook anything. The way forward was becoming clearer, but I knew we were stepping into unknown territory with her case. I stood at Sarah's bedside, wrestling with the weight of my next decision.
Hi.
Dose steroids were our best shot at stopping her immune system's attack on her brain, but they came with their own demons. The worst of these was steroid-induced psychosis, a complication that haunted every doctor who'd had to make this call. About 1 in 20 patients on high doses developed it, and for someone already living in a warped version of reality, that risk felt particularly cruel. My old mentor's voice echoed in my head. "Sometimes the cure feels worse than the disease, but that's when you need to trust the science most." Those words had never felt more relevant than now. watching Sarah trace invisible patterns on the ceiling with her finger. The tiles, they're breathing, she murmured, her eyes fixed upward, getting bigger, then smaller, like lungs. It reminded me of those scenes from Stranger Things where reality ripples and bends. Funny how pop culture had captured the essence of Alice in Wonderland syndrome long before I encountered it in this sterile hospital room. At noon, we started the first infusion. I perched on the edge of her bed, explaining the treatment to Sarah and her parents. It's like hitting a reset button on your immune system, I said, watching the clear liquid snake its way down the IV line. Her mother gripped her hand, both their eyes locked on the steady drip, drip, drip. The next few hours had me on edge. I found myself hovering, checking vitals more than necessary, searching for any hint that the treatment was helping or hurting. But Sarah surprised us all with her composure. Even the veteran nurses remarked on her strength. "I feel like Alice," she said at one point, managing a small smile. "You know, when she drinks that potion and everything changes size. At least now we know why everything's so strange." But later, I read through her diary entries. One particularly struck me. "Today my fingers looked like slugs when I tried to write." The simple words painted a vivid picture of her daily struggle with this baffling condition. The pencil in Sarah's hand grew impossibly large, feeling more like a massive tree trunk than a writing tool. Her breakfast bowl seemed to melt into an infinite abyss before her eyes. Every detail she shared painted a vivid picture of her world constantly warping and shifting in ways that defied reality. I found myself particularly intrigued by her experience with palinopsia. She'd see lingering after images of objects long after looking away, describing it as seeing the Cheshire Cat smile, but with everything. These visual echoes stubbornly remained, like ghostly imprints burned into her vision. Her brain seemed stuck in an endless loop, refusing to release these processed images. Sarah's description of palinopsia offered crucial insights into AIWS's effects on visual processing. While a normal brain quickly clears its visual buffer to process new images, hers clung to previous ones like wet paint that wouldn't dry. This understanding would shape our treatment approach moving forward. By the second day, her symptoms evolved in unexpected ways. Objects began taking on impossible characteristics. She described her IV pole as made of liquid glass and claimed the nurse's footsteps created visible colors in the air. These strange sensory crossovers suggested the steroids were affecting her neural pathways differently than anticipated. 3 days into treatment, Sarah's condition worsened. The hospital corridor now appeared endless to her, turning simple trips to the bathroom into surreal journeys through distorted space. The steroids clearly weren't helping. I dove into recent medical literature, though information on AIDUS was frustratingly limited. Most treatments focused on managing symptoms rather than addressing underlying causes. But a breakthrough came in an obscure journal article mentioning a newly discovered autoimmune antibody linked to visual processing disorders. Following my instinct, I ordered additional blood work. When the results arrived that evening, my suspicions were confirmed. We'd found a second, previously undetected autoimmune antibody silently disrupting Sarah's neural pathways. This particular antibody was a recent discovery, one that had only come to light in the last few years as immunological testing advanced. It targeted specific proteins in the brain's visual processing centers, creating symptoms that mimicked more common neurological disorders. Finally, we had an explanation for why Sarah's case had fought against standard treatments, why her symptoms kept shifting in such peculiar ways. I rushed to consult with our immunology department. When Dr. Chen, our lead immunologist, reviewed the results, she confirmed what I'd suspected. "Think of this antibody as a skeleton key," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "It's unlocking a whole new understanding of what's happening here. This isn't just AIDUS, we're looking at a novel autoimmune response hitting multiple neural pathways at once." Everything shifted with this revelation. Sarah's condition wasn't simply AIWS, we were dealing with a complex autoimmune response that demanded an entirely different strategy. Steroids alone wouldn't cut it. Walking back to Sarah's room to share our findings, I couldn't shake the thought that reality seemed as fluid as her distorted perceptions. The discovery left me both thrilled and uneasy. We had a clearer target now, yes, but we were stepping into largely unexplored medical territory. The handful of documented cases involving this antibody pointed toward the need for more aggressive immunosuppression. That evening, I pored over every available case study, searching for patterns and treatment outcomes to light our way forward. Sarah's parents sat quietly as I explained what we'd found. Her father, drawing on his background as a high school science teacher, asked detailed questions about autoimmune responses and neural pathways. Her mother just held Sarah's hand, studying her daughter's face as if trying to burn it into memory. "Does this change her treatment?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Their trust weighed on me as I prepared to lay out our new approach. Studying her latest brain scans, I knew we'd reached a turning point. With conventional treatment failing, we needed to consider more aggressive options. The next steps carried risks, but the alternative was leaving Sarah trapped in her constantly distorting reality. Plasmapheresis. The word felt heavy as I explained it to Sarah and her parents. "It's like hitting a reset button for your blood," I said, watching their faces carefully. "We'll filter out the harmful antibodies that are making your brain see things differently than they really are." I walked them through the risks: infection, blood clots, allergic reactions. Sarah's parents shared a worried look, her mother's hand finding her father's and squeezing tight. "Will it hurt?" Her mother's voice trembled. "She'll be under anesthesia the whole time," I assured them. "We'll keep her comfortable and monitored." What I kept to myself was how Sarah's fear had been haunting me, how each of her distorted perceptions felt like my own failure to crack this case sooner. The morning of the procedure, tension filled the operating room. Sarah looked tiny on the table, surrounded by imposing medical equipment. The plasmapheresis machine stood beside her like some mechanical sentinel, its tubes and filters at the ready. Just before she drifted off, she whispered, "Will I still see the roses bleed, Dr. West?" Her words echoed in my mind as we began. The machine hummed steadily, methodically cleaning Sarah's blood. With each cycle, more of the troublesome antibodies that had warped her reality were filtered out. I watched the monitors intently, running calculations in my head, exchange volumes, replacement fluids. For all the art in medicine, moments like these demanded absolute precision. Time crawled. Every cycle brought us closer, but the waiting frayed nerves. Nurses moved with quiet efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting settings. I found myself studying Sarah's face despite knowing the anesthesia kept her pain free. Her steady breathing played counterpoint to the machine's rhythmic sounds. Partway through, a colleague, an immunologist, joined me. We discussed recent autoimmune encephalitis research and similar cases, though my attention rarely left Sarah's vital signs on the monitors. The conversation helped pass the hours, but my focus remained fixed on my young patient and the treatment that might finally give her back her reality. 2 days after Sarah began treatment, her younger brother Michael started experiencing similar symptoms. While playing video games, he said his hands looked like they were shrinking, and when he tried to grab his bedroom doorknob, the door seemed to drift away from him. This confirmed our suspicions of a family connection. We weren't dealing with an isolated case, but rather a genetic predisposition to autoimmune dysfunction. Michael's milder symptoms gave us precious insight into how the condition progressed. Because we caught it early, before it could fully develop, we were able to prevent him from experiencing the severe distortions that had affected his sister. More than that, his case helped us understand the genetic aspect of AIWS, opening up entirely new research possibilities. Our research department took immediate interest in the genetic link between the siblings. We preserved blood samples, studied genetic markers, and dug deep into their family history. Their father mentioned a distant aunt who'd had strange spells when she was young, though the specifics were unclear. Every detail, no matter how small, deepened our understanding of this puzzling condition. Having both siblings under our care let us track symptom progression in real time. Michael's case essentially became our control group, helping us refine our treatment approach. While the data we gathered would prove priceless for future patients, I never forgot there were real people behind these clinical observations. Sarah's response to plasmapheresis was remarkable. After her third treatment, she told us objects had stopped changing size, though some visual distortions remained. "The walls still breathe sometimes," she explained, "but they're not gasping anymore, just gentle sighs. Her ability to describe these changes so clearly helped us track her recovery with precision. Word spread through the medical community about our cases. While colleagues pushed me to publish our findings, I had reservations. The media often sensationalized neurological conditions, rarely considering patient privacy. Sarah's experience wasn't some sideshow attraction, it was a breakthrough in understanding how our brains perceive reality. The ethical questions kept me up at night. Publishing could help countless others with AIWs, but I worried about protecting Sarah's privacy. I spent hours rewriting the paper, carefully removing identifying details while preserving the crucial medical insights. Finding the right balance between advancing medical knowledge and safeguarding patient dignity felt more challenging than ever. Even as colleagues insisted the potential benefits outweighed the risks, they pointed to similar cases where published findings had led to groundbreaking treatments. Still, I couldn't get Sarah's vulnerable expression out of my mind as she described her distorted reality. While her family would make the final call, I felt the weight of presenting them with such a consequential choice. One morning during rounds, Sarah began sketching her perceptions. Her artwork revealed a striking progression from jumbled, warped landscapes to increasingly coherent views. These visual journals became vital evidence of her recovery, though subtle distortions still lingered in her drawings. As Sarah grew more stable, I found myself contemplating the very nature of perception. This wasn't just treating symptoms, we were fundamentally rewiring how her brain processed reality. The implications went far beyond medicine, venturing into philosophical territory. After all, isn't reality simply our brain's interpretation of sensory information? Sarah's case challenged our basic assumptions about perception. During a memorable consultation, a visiting neurologist posed a fascinating question. If we can medically alter someone's perception of reality, what does that reveal about consciousness itself? The discussion stretched for hours, drawing in staff members and even a psychiatrist who happened to be visiting. Sarah's case had become a springboard for exploring human perception at its core. These conversations sparked collaboration with consciousness researchers. Their perspective helped us grasp AIW's broader implications and suggested novel approaches for treating other perceptual disorders. Sarah's journey had revealed unexpected pathways, forcing us to question how the brain constructs our reality. Our successful treatment protocol advanced our understanding of autoimmune neurological conditions. As other hospitals adopted our methods, a network of AIW specialists gradually formed. We'd found strength in numbers, no longer facing this challenge in isolation. Recovery came in waves. Each morning, when I checked on Sarah, I'd find her testing her reality, counting ceiling tiles, measuring distances with her eyes, watching the clock. "They don't drip anymore," she told me one morning with a genuine smile. "The hands just tick normally now." Her parents saw the changes before anyone else. That constant fear in their daughter's eyes started fading, replaced by moments where she seemed truly at peace. When her mother brought in Sarah's old copy of Alice in Wonderland, they read together. Passages that once terrified her now brought soft laughter. "The Cheshire Cat isn't so scary now," she said, running her finger along the illustration steadily. The healing didn't come without cost. The months of heavy steroid treatment had taken their toll, with early osteoporosis showing up in her follow-up scans. But Sarah tackled each new challenge with incredible spirit. During a particularly rough physical therapy session, she joked, "Well, at least I'm not running late for the Mad Hatter anymore." Her case revolutionized our understanding of AIWS. We meticulously documented everything from how her visual perception slowly normalized to the subtle ways her brain adapted to treatment. While there were plenty of cases describing how symptoms began, very few detailed successful recovery. Sarah's story would change that. Her experience opened new doors in our understanding of consciousness itself. How does the mind build our reality? What happens when those building blocks start to crumble? These questions kept our neurology department up at night, sparking endless debates. As time went on, Sarah described her remaining symptoms with remarkable clarity. The world would sometimes shimmer at the edges, like heat waves off hot pavement, but she could handle it now. Together, we developed grounding techniques, touching solid objects, focusing on fixed points, breathing exercises that anchored her to reality. Using what we learned from Sarah, our team created a treatment protocol combining medications with cognitive behavioral strategies. Soon, other patients with similar symptoms began benefiting from her journey. A teenage boy in Michigan found himself experiencing similar distortions, his world expanding and contracting just as Sarah's had. Through the same treatment approach, he eventually found his way back to normal perception. We saw it again with a college student in Boston whose reality had twisted like a carnival mirror, but who recovered within months. It was during our conversations about perception that Sarah revealed her most profound insights. She had a way of understanding consciousness that left me questioning everything I thought I knew. Reality isn't fixed, she once told me, her voice steady despite the chaos she was describing. It's more like a consensus we all agree on. Sometimes my brain just decides to vote differently. Her perspective shattered conventional medical models, forcing us to rethink everything we understood about perception disorders. Those intense months with Sarah became a masterclass in understanding the human mind. Every patient we treated afterward benefited from what she taught us. We learned to truly listen, to understand that these neurological conditions weren't just glitches in the system, they were portals into understanding consciousness itself. The impact of Sarah's case rippled far beyond our hospital walls. Neurologists nationwide began reaching out, sharing similar cases and incorporating our insights into their treatments. A research team in London even used our findings to develop new diagnostic criteria for early-stage AI DUBUS. What began as one girl's journey through her personal wonderland had become a blueprint for understanding this mysterious condition. In my final case notes, I wrote something that would become fundamental to my approach to neurological disorders. We're all just one antibody away from our own wonderland.